CIOs are not equipped to be plant managers. They don't own the assets. It goes back to what we've said 100 times over. Who owns the assets? If something happens, who's that frontline defender that's going to be there, the first responder, as you mentioned, that's going to be there to resolve the issue, whatever that is?
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Craig Duckworth.
And my name is Dino Busalaki.
And today, let's talk about, what do you want to talk about, Dino?
I think a very popular conversation that a lot of our listeners like talking about or listening about is OT-IT convergence. I guess the real question is, what does that really mean in the OT realm of manufacturing and industrial environments?
I think it could be anything. I've heard IT-OT convergence. I've heard IT-OT collision. I've heard digital 4.0, 5.0, industry, whatever you want to call it. There's 100 different names for it. I think at the end of the day, it kind of goes back to who owns the asset? What are you trying to get from is it data you're trying to get? Is it support you're trying to get from the IT teams? What are you trying to achieve? And what's the best way to do that within your organization?
I think there's even a more basic fundamental question is OT considered an IT shadow group, right? I'm trying to get rid of all your shadow IT groups that you have within your organization, right? But when it comes to OT, I'm a firm believer that it stands alone. What they do, right? Data driving physical outcomes is not the same as data driving data outcomes in the IT world. And all the work that I witness that's being done in manufacturing environments, all the development work, a lot of that infrastructure is all managed predominantly by the OT teams.
Well, I would go one further and say the underlying principles are different, meaning OT beats to the safety drum and IT beats to the data privacy or the data security drum, but not from a safety aspect.
Right. Well, I saw a statement, it's all based around incident response, but an OT response is about controlling chaos without triggering a catastrophe. Your first responder is the operator when there's an event. It's not some IT group trying to squash what's going on. You got to get those machines and that product into a safe state, right? And it's organized of a shutdown as you can get it without losing product, without destroying equipment, without hurting anybody, without some hazardous environmental release, whatever. Those are your first responders when there's an event within a manufacturing environment. And so, again, I get back to that fundamental question, do organizations believe OT is a shadow IT group? The answer, in my view, is no. But I'm open to listening to what others have to say because I recognize who is doing this development work of these applications, who's implementing them, who's supporting them, and it's not IT, right? It's these engineering groups, it's these system integrators and your OEMs and the operations staff at the manufacturing level. So the challenge is how do you get IT-OT convergence, right? It doesn't mean that they can't work together for budgeting and resources, to try to meet needs. But I was just at an event recently, and it was a vendor summit at a client, and the room was predominantly, everybody there were the SIs and OEMs that were providing machine centers and applications in a manufacturing environment. And in our particular case, being a system integrator, having a cybersecurity practice was intriguing to those other system integrators who don't have that type of practice within an organization, meaning that they're not looking at what they're doing through a cybersecurity lens for the applications and systems they're developing for the client. This is where I think IT can be very beneficial in influencing that discussion, right? But you have to work hand in hand and very closely with those SIs and OEMs and the internal manufacturing teams to be able to drive that governance, right? Set policy in terms of technologies. I mean, how often do we hear, that some manufacturer on the IT side has went out and picked an OT cybersecurity tool, and nobody from the OT side is even participating. And the result in that is you don't get OT participating at all. And so where's the value and the benefit to the organization when you have that huge disconnect, right? You're not getting your IT-OT convergence in that particular case. Because the only way you can demonstrate if you're getting closer to that convergence model is there's an ongoing dialogue back and forth between all of these responsible parties in how to improve and harden that cybersecurity posture with those machine centers within that plant. Meaning IT is working hand in hand with those system integrators participating and vice versa.
And part of that disconnect, I was at a conference last week as well, and there were a dozen vendors there, but what was obviously missing was the support mechanism, meaning the support network from an OT side. The vendors there, they have software, they've got technologies, they've got product, organizations there that are looking to source that are deploying or trying to deploy that across their fleet, and they're trying to do it all themselves. They should be leaning on that network, that infrastructure from the systems integrators, from the partners, from those trusted advisors that know their infrastructure and their environment well to do that. But what was really missing in part of this was IT was looking at it from we can support the infrastructure only and not the applications. And some of the organizations, they were looking for more than that. Some of them didn't want any of that. They were like, we want to see as much firewall. We want 2 firewalls on the north side and 2 firewalls on the south side. And we want an IDMZ with a gun pointed at each of you guys type scenario. And just to try and protect themselves because there was no trust there because of the inherent issues in the past, however long ago that was.
Right. Well, again, it gets back to how we started this conversation. Is OT a shadow IET group? And they're not. And so knowing that, how do you get aligned and transparent and collaborative between those two groups, right? Which would mean that the IT organization would have to take a larger role in the operations of these manufacturing facilities. And I'm talking about on a day-to-day basis, right, on the activity that goes on inside these facilities, because fairly large manufacturing facilities always have some amount of activity going on, whether it's lifecycle replacement, maybe an expansion, maybe new product, big maintenance windows that are going on, line changeovers, things of that nature, startups, et cetera. And they're not inherently involved in that and those activities and those functions. So that's the only way you can really change this dynamic. And I don't know if many CISOs or CIOs are going to sign up with the staffing and the resources that they need, the limited budget they probably have, to go out and find the qualified people that they need to have to go and work within those industrial environments. The good news is there are organizations out there who do that today, who have the DNA of the OT world, right? Who have automation and controls as part of their manufacturing mindset. And so you really need to start leveraging those organizations to help you, weave the cyber landscape in this industrial world.
The CIOs are not equipped to be plant managers. They don't own the assets. It goes back to what we've said 100 times over. Who owns the assets? If something happens, who's that frontline defender that's going to be there, the first responder, as you mentioned, that's going to be there to resolve the issue, whatever that is? And,
well, it's going to be plant, right? You got to get that plant to a safe state.
Yep. But, and you look at your incident response, or if somebody looks at an incident response for an organization, who's on that team? Who from the OT, boots on the ground, in the plant operator is practicing that incident response with the IT leaders, with the OT leaders, that's going to get the phone call that says, hey, everything's going south. What do we do? Eyes on the machine. What's happening locally? They've got to be part of that response.
And you have to get the folks that are most intimately knowledgeable of those applications and systems. Those are the folks that have to be at the tip of the spear when you're either implementing and executing cybersecurity projects and or dealing with an incident of some sort in that realm, right? And until you fix that, you're never going to get this done right, right? You can do it right, or you can do it again, right?
Yep. Heard that a million times.
And you would know, right? Because system integrators would be on the phone spending a lot of time talking to CISOs and CIOs and their teams about what's going on inside these manufacturing facilities to gain that knowledge, that inherent, intimate knowledge of the work that these groups are doing, not only the systems and the machines that they're bringing into these plants, but the ones that they're also maintaining and supporting for these plants.
It's not an easy task. You don't just learn this overnight. This is years or sometimes decades in the making and understanding. And, one of the stats that I took away last week is, a big percentage, and I don't know the exact number, but a very large percentage of the workforce is retiring and moving on in the next 5 years or so. And the concern is there going to be enough knowledge to replace that? And how do you adjust?
Now, that's where they're relying on AI, right? Is one of those tools, virtual, reality. There's a lot of technologies you could deploy, to be able to educate a new workforce. It can be done. The question is, are manufacturers willing to put forth, that type of investment to do that? So it's either that or you got to work within the framework of what you have. And what you have today is you have people who at the plant have inherent knowledge of those machines and their ecosystem of support partners that help them when the plant themselves can't resolve a particular issue. Then they go to their OEM or to the SI who developed and built and maybe maintains and supports that equipment. That's their go-to, right? Their phone isn't to pick up IT necessarily to find out why my filler's not running properly on my packaging line, right? It's OT's job to figure that out and their connections with the relationships with the vendors that they have to support that. So, for IT, most of all of this stuff is just blind spots for them.
Well, and all the plants are different. As much consistency as there is, each plant is going to be different. It's going to be unique. The processes are going to be different. There is no exact duplicate or replica as much as organizations would like to say there is.
So, getting back to the topic of this, OT not being a shadow IT group, then how do we get OT in a position to be funded properly? And not only just funded, but also to have some governance and strategy around how to improve their cybersecurity posture and the demands that they need to be placing on their partners who are bringing systems into their plants.
Again, that goes back to secure by design from an OEM manufacturer perspective, and then working with legal procurement for a secure by demand for those that are choosing not to support the secure by design and trying to back to the safety and the seatbelts in a vehicle, pick a date, standardize and say, this is the date going forward. These systems have to be in place, and eventually everything becomes compliant within a matter of timing.
Certain individuals, especially within the IT ranks who picked an OT cybersecurity tool, aren't concerned about east-west traffic. Well, just because you're not doesn't mean that those that are responsible for those machine centers aren't concerned about that east-west traffic. So that being said, how do I get that metadata in an actionable format for me to be able to take action, right? Getting it in a way to get it up and feed it to me in an organized fashion where it's optimized, it's prioritized, it's localized, and I can actually set a plan to build around this real data. And right now that's just not happening, especially when it's being done in a vacuum by a group that's I call it cloak and dagger, meaning that whoever put the tool in is just keeping it close to the vest and they're not sharing.
Well, again, you've got the disparity between security ops. You talk about cloak and dagger. Everything is tight-lipped. Everything is, just me. You can't see that. It's not for you. That type mentality where I think if there were issues or incidents or things happen, if there was think of an ISAC, community sharing event that could, help and protect the entire ecosystem, I think it would be beneficial.
Well, one of the things that I learned last week, and it's very common, is the whole conversation around OEE, right? Overall equipment effectiveness. How well are you able to make the goods that you make with the assets that you have, right? Quality, availability, and performance. And, if you're doing this right, you're going to be able to get and determine how you might be able to get a few more positive OEE percentage points if you can find some of the things that are causing unplanned, unscheduled downtime within your environment that are being caused by these external groups. Things that you can't quite always put your finger on. A reason, again, I always like using the filler as an example. Why did my filler slower stop? And by the time the organization resets the equipment and cleans up the mess and gets approval to start running again 4 hours later at, 50 to 100 grand an hour in loss, they just want to get back up and running. But what caused the downtime? If you can't visibly see it, then they just keep moving on, right? But it'd be nice to sit there and go, hey, the reason why the filler quit working was because Craig got in there and made a PLC change. OT specific, saw it, did it, and their change was disruptive. Or was it IT scanning the network at the wrong time, hitting my servers and being disruptive to the HMIs and maybe to the PLCs? And that caused the problem. Again, back to OEE. And these tools and these technologies with the right people, reviewing that data can help improve that. Some of the projects, these plants going on, like the one I was at last week, half the projects are all around OEE, right? How can I improve my operational effectiveness with that equipment? And they're doing all kinds of, control system jujitsu, right? And data collection in order to do that, right? And then you sit there and you got this tool that's sitting there that's giving you real-time information on impact to the environment. And not only just as a cybersecurity footprint that's in there, but also as a industrial automation control system integrity technology. For those of you out there, again, I don't think OT is an IT shadow group. So that's my 2 cents.
And I would agree with you. And I think that if organizations look at it and really understood the function and what they're doing, they would see that it's a real team that's doing different function than IT. So I think of IT very consistent, very uniform. OT is different. OT is not always the same. It's a physical outcome versus a digital outcome. There's things that look at outcomes measured in human life, measured in other tasks that are not just data privacy. And it means something. It hits home differently when bad things happen and people don't get to go home to their loved ones.
If you're a CIO or a CISO, I would encourage you to find out who your key OEMs and system integrators are within your organization. And you need to build a bridge to those groups to find out what they're doing in order to improve cybersecurity within the systems and the machines that they're designing and building and supporting for your manufacturing facilities, right? You need to start down that path. If you're not willing to do that, then the OT is going to end up at some point just resolving around what they've always done, just working within their OT ecosystem. And some integrators are going to be good and some of them are not.
I would say even take that further and pick up the phone and go down to the plant. Schedule a time to walk through the manufacturing environment of your organization with someone on the OT team and look and see and help understand what some of their issues and concerns are and how jointly you can work together to solve them. Again, it's that collaboration that wins every time. We just don't see it often enough.
I don't hardly see it at all. We're a system integrator. I don't get calls from CISOs and CIOs.
We should.
I get calls from plant people and integrators, right?
Right, yeah.
Here's what I will say is we are starting to see OT-specific roles being set up in these manufacturers where somebody's being tasked with being the OT cybersecurity lead or group, right?
I'm seeing more of that, which tells me that there at least is some knowledge transfer or some advancements toward a collaboration.
Right. And the funding of those resources varies, right? And who's paying for them? Is the manufacturer paying for it, the operations side, plant side, or is it being paid for by IT? Or a combination there of both,
Organizations, if you're out there listening today, take the next steps. Reach out to a system integrator like us. Reach out to a partner that you have. Reach out to a vendor you're working with. Try and determine how you can collaboratively bring the IT and OT together so you don't have these shadow IT or shadow OT groups that are trying to figure this out in silos. This is not going to get fixed in a silo. It's not. Whether the budget needs moved over, you carve out some of the budget and say, here it is, you can use it for this, you support them in whatever ways that you can. It's got to be a collaborative effort.
All right.
Perfect. Thanks, Dino. Great conversation.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.